Hi, welcome back to our second episode. I'm Sahana Purohit, one of your co-hosts, along with Greg Jarbo and John Peterson. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So in this episode, we are going to talk about the command center. We'll be interviewing the chief and also the crises that erupted in the town of Acton.
And one of the things that I was surprised to learn is that the key was communication. It turns out dispatch was at the center of everything.
And I think one of the things that was nice to see is how quickly the town went from the initial confusion, which always accompanies an event of this type, to organize information and get it back out to the people who needed to respond.
Typically what I would do on that day is come in, make sure everything's running okay, and then go up to Narrow Park to participate with the Town Employee Appreciation Day. So did that. As things were winding down, I still had things I had to take care of in the office. So I headed back to the office, started doing a few things, and noticed it got rather dark outside. So typically what I do when I notice something weather coming in, I'd go to different weather radar applications. And when I looked at that, I could easily track what was coming in. I could see what was coming. And it looked like it was heading straight for Acton. So I reached out. I tried to call up to Narrow Park because I knew there were still people up there. So I tried to reach various people. I couldn't get through to anybody. No one was either answering the phone. I don't know if they were busy trying to pack things up or what was going on. So then I went over to dispatch and I said, can you send a cruiser up there and let them know to take cover because there's a pretty good storm coming through.
Most of us, or many of our police department, were enjoying a nice day at Narrow Park with the rest of the town employees for our annual Employee Appreciation Day. We had lunch there, and we, at the time the event ended, we all were departing and saw that the weather was starting to change a little bit. So I got in my vehicle, driving back to West Acton, and started up Main Street. And it wasn't very long before the weather turned very bad. I would say in the area of Route 2A, when I was crossing over there, started to rain quite significantly, and I continued up Main Street at a slow pace as well as everyone else, and noticed that the wind was picking up. It was becoming very stormy.
And normally, how long would it take for you to drive from NARA to the Public Safety Building?
Probably 10 minutes.
And how long did it take you on September 8th?
Several hours.
And why did that happen?
Well, I began again from Narrow Park going up 27 southbound, and once I got to about Post Office Square, it had really started to downpour quite a bit. The wind was blowing, there were leaves blowing around. Traffic, everyone had their headlights on, it got very dark, and we continued, although slowly, towards the center of town, and probably a quarter mile after the post office, we stopped. Vehicles going south had stopped, and I noticed a large limb in the road in the northbound side. And I was sitting in my car in a polo shirt and shorts, as I had just attended this event. So I contemplated getting out to move that piece of wood so that the traffic that was headed north could continue. And after a few minutes, I decided I should do that, and I got out and was immediately drenched. It was just so much rain, such a downpour. The wind was really whipping, and to be honest with you, I was frightened that something was going to happen. There had already been a large limb that had fallen, and were more going to fall. I didn't know, but I quickly got out. I dragged the branch across the road so some of the vehicles could continue, and then I made it up to Nagog Hill Road, at the corner of Nagog Hill Road, and it was there that I noticed that a vehicle was underneath the top section of a light pole, and that was the reason why our traffic had stopped. The wind and trees and whatnot had blown over the top of the light pole, and it had landed on a vehicle that was occupied. So it was at that point I blocked the road at Nagog Hill and Main Street, and we were able to get people up Nagog Hill Road and across Nagog Hill, but no one could get through the center of town. So that was my my post for the next, I would say, 2 to 3 hours. and just kind of blocking traffic there and trying to assist with people that were still trying to get home from work, trying to get their kids from school. So there was a lot going on.
So as the storm came in, you wait for the first call because you know it's coming. And the dispatchers would start dispatching calls, and they were just coming in one after another. So I went over to dispatch to help them prioritize. Obviously life safety is number one. We had a number of different calls. We had trees down, we had trees on wires down, and then we would have things like trees and wires down on a car with people in it. So obviously something like that would take priority.
And I heard that later we had trees on houses.
We had at least, if I recall, we had at least 13 trees on houses. And so what happened is as things were going on, like I said, I went over to help dispatch a little bit. Town manager got in touch with me, and we decided to open up the EOC, Emergency Operations Center. So myself, the police chief, and the town manager went upstairs where we had a big whiteboard. And just as calls were coming in, we just started listing all the calls and trying to pay attention to priorities. My staff out in the field, the captain usually runs the shift. They did a great job as far as directing where the calls should go next. We had to call in mutual aid. We called mutual aid in as far away as Harvard and Air, I believe, to come in and assist us because we only have limited resources.
In the length of time that it took for me to get from the sports pavilion to where my truck was parked, which was probably 300 yards, it went from looking really bad and starting to rain to being just a torrential downpour. Got in my truck, headed home. By the time I hit Main Street, the storm had really hit. The power was out. The traffic signals were already down at 2A and 27, so I took the back road down Harris Street out to Route 2A. And by the time I got to in front of Nagog Woods, the rain was coming down so hard and the wind was so fierce coming across the lake that I couldn't see. And I pulled into the parking lot by the old Scupper Jacks, got away from all the buildings and just sat there and sat the storm out.
Well, you showed me a picture on your phone that actually highlighted the cell that hit Acton, and it was like it was really aimed at Acton in terms of the intensity of it and all the damage that it created. But eventually, of course, you made it back to the public safety building. So tell me what happened after that.
After I was able to get back, I met with the town manager and the fire chief and the DPW director, as well as a coordinator that Eversource had sent out to be able to assess what the major problems were in Acton and kind of get a response directed towards restoring power to the many houses that were without power. And we spent most of the night there, I would say until probably close to midnight, and then our plan was to return at 7 a.m. the next morning or thereabouts to continue with that work.
And for people who are not, aware of the different issues in responding to these kind of events, when there are wires down, our ability to respond is limited because we need to deal with the electrical issue and make sure that it's safe before other people come in. So that actually stretches out the response. But again, my understanding is we were sort of lucky in that because the event was restricted to Acton, Eversource could bring in all the resources that Acton needed to immediately address those problems.
That was very helpful. Another part of it that where it was really targeted Acton, I think the most significant damage in the storm on that day was Acton. So we were able to get a great response, a timely response from Eversource. And another part of this, which I'm sure you'll cover at some point or speak to the people from the DPW, they were also available and they were responding. They were co-responding with many of our officers and deploying barricades and cones and things like that. So it was really all hands on deck, and everyone did really a terrific job in the initial response and trying to figure out what the most significant problems were and what we needed to direct in that location in order to get things restored.
On September 8th, 2023, on a Friday, We were at Professional Development Day. I think everything wrapped up around 2 o'clock. Started to head home. I lived the next town over. Just got over the town line and Acton PD called and said, we got a problem. We have a microburst that came through town, I think, and trees are everywhere. So I turned around and came into work, and on my way in, I called in 13 people.
And how long was it before you got your whole team assembled?
It took us about an hour and a half to get everybody here, which would normally only takes about 30 minutes.
And what held people up?
Trees down, wires down, cars blocking roads, the whole nine.
We set up sort of a little EOC upstairs in the chief's conference room with Carl Maria, the police chief, and the fire chief, and the deputy police chief. And it was a good spot for us because dispatch was right downstairs, so they could keep updating us to different trees down and power lines down. And we were there for quite a while. We ended up trying to bring in Eversource. We had a direct, coincidentally, 2 days before, we had a meeting with the new Eversource rep, just sort of a standard introductory meeting in case you ever need to talk to them. And it turns out we called him right away, and we ended up spending a lot of time with him that night too.
You know, the dispatchers received hundreds of calls in a short couple hours on Friday. I would say the numbers were probably pretty significant on Saturday because people are curious. They want to know, when's my power coming back on? And in those cases, they should be calling the power company. But understandably, when they want an answer, sometimes they'll call the police department. So they stayed quite busy for the rest of the weekend.
Obviously, you knew which roads were closed, but if you're an officer in your cruiser out someplace and then you get a call, you need to go over to Village Street or wherever it is.
Right.
How do they get that up-to-date information about what's going on in terms of road closures so that they don't have to discover for themselves that there's a tree across the road?
Well, sometimes they do discover that, but a lot of it is just communication. And the dispatchers keep a running toll of what the issues are, what the road closures are, and we can always radio in. And if there's a police detail or someone working alongside with Eversource or someone else, the highway department, if they clear a tree and the road's now open, they'll give that information over the radio to dispatch, allowing the officers that are on the radio to hear that, as well as dispatch will take it off their list so that, you know, that list gets thinned out as quickly as possible.
We spent a lot of time on his communications because everyone knows that wires are down and it's kind of madness, but people don't know the scope. They just know what's around their neighborhood and what they're reading on Facebook, for example. So one of the things that we did was we tried to get information out through the newsflash system and through social media. And we didn't have all the answers, but we wanted to just set a baseline for what we knew and sort of what we were looking at.
Luckily for the police and dispatch, it was right near the shift change, so they could simply hold on to the additional staff and basically double down, but that doesn't work for fire.
It doesn't, but we do what's called striking a box, which notifies off-duty personnel to come in, but that takes time for them to come in, depending where they're coming from. And then there were all kinds of traffic concerns. There's trees across roads were closed. Even our engines and apparatus could not make it to certain calls through the normal routes. They'd have to try one way. Nope, that's not working. All right, let's try and get around this way, see if that's working. And then we have, if there's wires down, we have limited capability because we don't know if those wires are live or not. Some people's home generators might kick in, which backfeeds the wires. So even if the electric company tells us they're dead, they might not be dead. So that limits us, and we do the best we can to you know, if it's a short distance and we can send someone to walk around and see what's going on the other side or up the street, that we'll do that. And we just kept moving from call to call to call, dealing with each situation as we found it. We reached out to some of our resources. The Eversource was incredible, sending resources down to us. One of the things that we were fortunate with this event is it was so concentrated. If it was a more widespread event, we would have less resources available to us. So we reached out to different resources. Eversource, I think I've never seen so many resources from Eversource in one town at one time. I believe there were 60 crews the first night and then 90 crews the next 2 days, which is unheard of.
Where fire trucks are going, we're going. Where ambulances are going, we're going. make sure the police station's open, make sure the fire stations can get in and out, and main roads, and then secondary roads.
And obviously there were a lot of communication challenges that day. How did you stay in touch with the police and fire?
I have a portable radio that I carry for the police, and they call me right on my radio, and I call Ryan, and we talk to each other through cell phone.
Fantastic. So you guys started cleaning things up. So what did you wind up doing Friday evening and into the early morning hours?
We tried making sure all the main roads were pretty much passable. They weren't fully open, but we made sure it was one lane open, so emergency vehicles and residents could get to and from. The biggest challenge we had was that at 3:30, school got out for the little kids, and we had buses everywhere. So we were trying to get the buses turned around and through the roads to get these kids home. I think a lot of kids ended up going back to the school, had to be picked up by parents, but and then the rain came, so then we had flooding.
And how do you figure out where to go first?
Well, in that time, I was driving back, so I'm just trying to scribble down anything that I can have. So I had a list already by the time I did get back here, and we never got back here. We ended up parking in a field and walking in to get all our trucks and stuff. But then the police will sort of prioritize it, but I always ask if it's in wires, because if it's in wires, I won't even bother when there's stuff that needs to be done that isn't in wires, so it can be done faster. Or like Jason said, if there's emergency equipment that's stuck, or that obviously is a higher priority. It was a storm of lists. Everybody had clipboards of pages and pages and pages of just addresses.
So how did you decide when it was time to call it Friday night?
When we were good set passing for everybody to get through, emergency vehicles were through. We had roads open partially, so we took a quick break to come back in Saturday morning at 5 a.m. and get right back at it. And we spent about a 12-hour day Saturday doing that, and then we came back in Sunday, maybe about an 8-hour day Sunday, and then back to regular work on Monday, doing the same thing for the next about 3 weeks. It took us to get all roads open.
What you've just seen is how a response turns into a system. In the hours after the microburst, Acton's challenge was no longer just handling emergencies. It was about managing information, keeping departments aligned, and maintaining operations over time. The Emergency Operations Center became the place where scattered reports were pulled together and turned into clear priorities. It's where limited resources were assigned carefully and where outside partners were brought into one coordinated effort. This episode showed that command isn't about control. It's about communication. When phones stopped working and roads couldn't be used, shared radio systems, mutual aid, and in-person coordination made the difference. Just as important, the experience revealed gaps and led to changes that will improve future responses. This lesson from this nerve center is clear. Emergencies don't reward improvisation alone. They reward preparation, trust, and the ability to turn information into action together.